The more data you track, the easier it is to get overwhelmed and drown in the noise. You need a way to easily track only what matters and make it effortless to review at a glance. In this video, I'll show you the exact system I use to condense years of data into a single screen. You'll learn how to visualize your performance in a super practical way that never overwhelms you, how to avoid wasting hours of your time on weekly and monthly reviews so you can actually stick with them, and how to track only what matters and safely ignore the rest. Let's dive in.
This video is going to be in 4 parts. I want to start right away by showing you how it looks when it's done all the way right. So you get the big picture. We'll go from days all the way to the decades in the system and how everything is visualized performance-wise. In part 2, we'll actually get to the how of the video. So the part 2 will be exactly what it is that we're tracking. So we're filtering for the signal and ignoring a bunch of noise. In part 3, we're gonna look into exactly how to aggregate the data. So everything that we're tracking, how it's consistently aggregated from days into weeks, months, and higher level timeframes. And the final part, part 4, is gonna be about making the review process effortless. Because if we're gonna be tracking all this data, we want to make sure that it doesn't go to waste because we skip our review process. So we want to make it very easy. We want to make it glanceable. We want to make it non-negotiable. For part 1, let's start with the days, and let me jump into the day I'm having right now. So we'll get back to this, but let's start with the habits. You have to be tracking some of the habits, because if we're talking about measuring our performance, the question, of course, is then performance on what? And here I'm going to mention specifically 4 things that you're going to be measuring and tracking. And the first one is the habits. So here you can see some of the habits that I'm tracking. And the way these are tracked is through the checkboxes that exist on this daily cycle. Now, there are a few possible ways that you can go about tracking your habits. I find this one to be the simplest and the most straightforward for people to implement, so I recommend this a lot, but you can go into more complex systems. I find that they don't really add a lot, but the complexity and the overwhelm that it brings to people is quite significant. So I would suggest you stick with simple checkboxes that exist on your cycles. You know, you can have weekly habits, so they will have weekly checkboxes on a weekly cycle. And daily habits would have daily checkboxes on a daily cycle. This is what you can see here. This is step number 1. Step number 2 is you want to be tracking some of your key health stats, some of the metrics that are number-based. So if we scroll all the way up to the beginning of my day, the upper part of the daily template, you can see that there is the morning tracking section. And some of the key stats that I track is my weight, obviously everything related to my sleep. I track my HRV. If you have an Oura Ring or something like a Garmin watch or any like a Whoop band, you're going to have this data as well. And you can already see that it's also being aggregated a little bit for nicer display. But this is just key health data that's probably very common. You can also, if we scroll down to the review section, I also track my steps. This is not a lot, but I think these are the most important. You want to track your sleep, your recovery, whatever metric you use for that, maybe HRV, maybe you have some kind of like a body battery score, or whatever that you feel really reflects your recovery state in an objective way. I think that's a good metric to track, and there is a lot of studies that suggest that HRV is a pretty good metric for that. So that's 2. 3, I think it makes a lot of sense to track on top of objective metrics for recovery, for example, and performance. I like to add to that some subjective metrics that you actually track. So if we again go back to the morning tracking, you can see that there is energy level. There are 4 energy levels. These 4 are obviously, they don't come from some device. I just input them manually. But it matters a lot because sometimes maybe your stats that are coming from your smartwatch or whatever tell you that you should be feeling great, but you don't, or vice versa. So I do like having this subjective metric. And same goes for the review. So this is the day that's still ongoing, so I don't have this data filled out, but at the end of the day I have a reflection where I do judge my performance, and you can see it also has 4 possible options and recovery. So that's 3. We have first our habits, 2 we have our objective number-based metrics like weight and sleep time, etc. We have 3 we have subjective metrics for energy, performance, and recovery. And the 4th type of metric that I think is really important is also subjective, but it's text-based. So at the end of the day, if you have a reflection section in your daily cycle, it's the pros, cons, and lessons. So it's just something that you think went well for the day, something that you think that needs work, and some of the lessons that you drew out. These exist on many different cycles. They're going to be the same for weeks and months, etc. And the 4th one that I would add is just morning notes. You can use them in different ways. You can use them like Tim Ferriss style, where it's just random journaling to brain dump things out of your mind. Or the way I use them is just to give a little more context for the way I feel. So if I slept well, if I was waking up during the night, some of this stuff is obviously going to be reflected in the objective metrics, but sometimes I want to add a little extra description to that. Maybe I really feel fired up and motivated, and sometimes maybe it's just like, okay, let's recap. These are the core 4 metrics that I suggest you start tracking in order for this whole system to work. But before we get into the way we aggregate all these metrics into our weekly cycle, there's one thing to mention. And this is the fact that there is a certain level of aggregation that's already happening on a daily cycle. If you look at my habits, you're going to see that they are all aggregated into certain domain scores. I've already done a video about specifically how to create a scoring system for your habits. So I'm going to link it here. If you want to go into more detail about that, you can watch that video. But just to quickly recap, what it is that you want to do is you obviously map all your habits to these checkboxes. Then you assign specific score values and point values to each habit. So you say that your walk or movement PM block costs this number of points, and your midday rest or work shutdown costs this number of points. And what that allows you to do is not only group all these habits by category. So you say, these are my clarity habits, these are my life admin habits and nutrition habits, but then you can aggregate all these points into an overall score for that domain. So in this case, if we look on the left, that allows us to have specific points for every domain of life. And as a final step, we can aggregate all these points into an overall mastery score for the day. Now we have one single metric, one single number to represent the entire day and to tell us whether we're on track or not and how we're doing. And this is going to be hugely important, especially when we want to be aggregating and visualizing our performance on a level of months and years, because there you don't want to be looking at individual routines or individual data points. You want to be looking at a larger picture. Now let's look into our weekly cycle and how we're aggregating our key performance indicators so they're easily visible at a glance. So there's like very little cognitive load and not a whole lot of friction. Let's look at the week that this day belongs to. It's the one in progress. This one, it's Tuesday now, so there's not a whole lot of data. So let me actually go into the whole cycles. Let's open weeks. And this is how the aggregation would look like. We're specifically interested in this part. In this case, there's more data, and when it comes to your projects and your goals and your focus alignment, etc. But in this specific video, we're interested in the metrics that we've talked about, your habits, your energy, performance, recovery, and some of the key metrics. You can see that the entire thing is visualized in this way. There is our mastery score. These are all of our habits, but again, you're not seeing already individual habits. In this case, you're seeing a distillation of all the habits in this way where every dot is a day in a specific domain. So this would be our Monday, and these are all the domains. and your mastery score overall. We also have a type of day that we were having. Let's now look into a specific day, a specific week. Let's take this one, that's the previous one, because this one still very much in progress. And but by the way, the images that you see here is just me assigning a specific image to every week. I read this book last week and I really enjoyed it. So it's got the image of the week, by the way, highly recommended if you're interested. But if we look inside, as I said, our main focus here is going to be into this section here, and also it's going to be our review part, so the fundamentals review specifically, but also our projects, wins, and lessons. So let's go over this visualization and the data that we've talked about in a daily cycle and how it's reflected here. Remember our 4 core things. One is your habit data. This is what you can see here and here. So each individual domain gets its own row, and each individual day gets its own column. So you can see we have our days, Monday through Sunday, and then we'll have day type. We can have different types of days in the system. You can have a recovery day. This is, for example, the day I had here. These ones are execution days. These are where I actually target to move key projects forward. And we have this type of day. This is my unplug day. Usually it happens on Sunday. And this is me just really unplugging from the system and giving myself a little bit of a rest from the regiment and the structure and the tracking of everything. Then you can see all the domains we mentioned in a daily cycle. You have your life, admin, recovery, nutrition, and all of these, but each of these are distilled into a single point. So you can see all the performance on all the domains across all the days. And then this mastery row is the one that aggregates all the rows below into a single data point. In addition to this mastery row, we get more details here. So this is the overall mastery score that we had for the entire week, the target that we had, and we get some feedback. If this cycle was still in progress, it would say that it's in progress. If we were below the mark, it would say that we've missed the mark. And we also can specifically see how we are doing in relation to our target. Moving on to our subjective scoring, you can see it here. So this is the subjective scoring summary. Each of these, by the way, it's a separate formula that displays these. This is what we have for our subjective scoring. You notice we had our energy drop down for our morning evaluation. Then in the evening, we were judging our performance and recovery. So this is what you can see here. This is quite actually an unusual week. I don't actually have 7 days of high energy in a row too often, but that happened. And then you can see in parentheses, we have the summary. So the percentage points of performance recovery, in this case, was 95%. You can see they're all converted to emojis for easy view. And these are your key health metrics. So you can see there's sleep data, and then there is also weight. These are also displayed pretty much in the same way you saw in the summary of the day. So if we look into our daily cycle here, you can see that there is a summary prop. So it's very similar to the way you see here. There's one additional metric here, and this is this SSD prop, but I'll describe that a little later when we specifically talk about the way we aggregate data. And one additional metric that we have here is our rating. Now, this is a simple drop down, but this is in the same spirit that we have for the days. We have objective metrics, but at the end of the week, I also give a rating to the week. I have this coupling of objective metrics with a subjective metric that I give at the end of the cycle. That's how all the metrics are aggregated into weeks, and you can easily see this in this way. Now, of course, you can dig into the details of every specific day. So as I told you, we have our days display. If, for example, you looked here first and you see, okay, something was going on here in our recovery and nutrition on Thursday and Friday, you want to dig into that. Obviously you can, but you have this higher level overview at the level of the week, which is really nice before you even dig into the days. And what's important to mention is that every single cycle has the same structure. There's an overview on the left, there's clarity and planning, box with these things, and there is a review and reflection. So this is going to also make the whole aggregation and review process very seamless and straightforward. This is our weekly cycle, and keep in mind that it's not about trying to record everything. It's about distilling what matters. Once you're clear on what matters, you need to make sure you visualize it in a glanceable way. If it takes more than 5 seconds to see if you're on track or not, you're not tracking the right way. Let's now move on to our monthly cycle. By the way, quick note here, you can see that every single cycle is connected to another cycle. So our days reference their parent week, our weeks reference their parent months, and so on, so on, so on. So it builds all the way up. Let's click into our June cycle and go into that. It's also in progress, but it's very close to being done. So we have 3 weeks so far, and this is the 4th week that we're having. You can see, first of all, that it's got the same structure as the weeks. I mentioned we have 2 sections, clarity and planning, and then reflection and review. And then on the left, we've got the summary. Let's go through these really quick because they differ slightly. So actually, the key health metrics are identical, and the mastery score is also. You can see here that it says cycle in progress because this month of June is still in progress. You can also see it from the image and etc. But this fundamentals view is quite different because now we're actually at the level where we're not looking at individual domains of life when it comes to our habits. So when it comes to our habits, they are already aggregated into this mastery score for the week. It's actually, let's look into our entire cycles. Let's go back to cycles so you can see more months. This is going to be more relevant. Yeah, this is much better because this cycle makes it look like I'm freaking perfect, which I'm not. So you can see these cycles, and you can, by the way, notice I've been really working on standardizing my Notion system lately. But point here is that you can see this energy, mastery, performance, and recovery. Those are the 3 metrics, the subjective metrics that we were inputting in our daily cycle, and those were aggregating into weeks. Now, when it comes to our weekly display, our mastery score was broken down by domain. Now, at the level of months and beyond, we're not going to be looking at individual domains anymore. We're going to be looking at an overall score. So you can see this visualization with color coding, etc. We'll actually dig into formulas in the next steps when we specifically talk about how we actually aggregate this data. But here it just gives you a better picture of this is not always perfect. You can see you have off days, you can have whole weeks when you're just sick and your energy is in the gutter. But these displays are more or less the same. Same goes for the mastery score. You can see this is the display you see when the cycle is in progress. This is when it's closed. You can also see surpassed by percentage if you're above the target. So like here we only surpassed it by 3%, but here we actually blew all the way through the target. And if we look into an individual cycle, so let's go back to June, what's really nice is that inside of every individual cycle, you can go into the fundamentals review, go into the overview, and you're going to see all the weeks that make up this cycle. In this case, a month, so it's going to be weeks. We were looking at the whole overview for the month here, but then we can look into this view, and then we see all the weeks that make it up. 4 weeks, this one in progress. It's really nice for reviews because you just toggle this section and then you can see your entire cycle as broken down by sub-cycles, and then you can see exactly the progression that you were having. And then if we scroll a little bit down, you can see also we have some charts. So this is just another way of visualizing your data. On a weekly time frame, we didn't have any charts because it's that review. I prioritize speed and efficiency. So I think weekly reviews should be quite quick because it's very, we're still existing on a very tactical level. But when it comes to months, you already want to have a little more visuals. So in this case, we visualize it with Notion charts across energy. We have our day type. If I had my recovery days or execution days, you can see exactly how many execution days I've had. You can see exactly if how many days I've hit my mastery target and how many days I have not, performance, recovery, and so on. And as we move up the cycles, this visualization is going to be more involved. But this is a very nice view for the months. At a glance, you can see a lot of data points. And now let's just scroll up and go into the quarter. So this is Q2 2025. Again, exactly the same structure, which is perfect. This view pretty much hasn't changed, except now we have slightly less columns here, exact same number of rows, energy, mastery, performance, and recovery. This data is the same, mastery score the same. This rating here is now not a drop down that we can pick ourselves, but this is in fact an aggregated rating from the months below and weeks below. So this is actually a formula that displays this, but all the rest of the stuff is pretty much identical. And these are the summaries for all the months underneath. If we dig down into the fundamentals, we can see an overview that has a very similar structure that we looked into on our monthly level. But here it's in fact, for months, it would have the weeks that compose the months. In this case, we would have the months that compose the quarters. You also have the charts here. They're a little more involved. Have the same charts that you had on a monthly level, the pie charts for energy, performance, recovery, mastery, and day types. But also now on level of quarters, we have our trend analysis. So you have your mastery score for every day in the quarter like this. And now we have the trend analysis for the energy and recovery. And these bars here already represent weeks of data, not days. These were days, and these are for all the weeks composing the quarter. So these were the charts. Also, you were looking at the sub-cycles. You can also look at sub-cycles. Actually, this would be really interesting to see on a level of a year. So let's actually jump into our 2025. And again, familiar structure. This is very similar. It's going to look almost exactly identical to months and quarters, except like a month would have columns for every week and a year would have a column for every quarter. Just a quarter has a column for every month. So you're going to have 4 columns in a year, and these are going to be the aggregate performance of every quarter. And the rest of the metrics and mastery score stayed the same, except you can see the number of points obviously has increased. So now we're up to 63,000 total points. Now let's look into the fundamentals review to see sub-cycles. But actually, I mean, sub-cycles is pretty clear. This is very standard. What I actually wanted to show you are the monthly summaries. These are going to be the sub-cycles. So just like when you look in the quarter, you can look into the 3 months that make it up. You can also break down the cycle into sub-cycles and get a more detailed picture. So it's also very nice for the year. Like you do the yearly review, you scroll down here and you get your monthly summaries for all the 12 months of the year. So in this case, we're in June. So these are all the months that I've had from the very start of the year. Like this is very awesome. And especially when you look at it in a larger screen. So I'm recording this video on a rather smaller window, but when I do my actual review, I throw it on a bigger screen and you can see all the 4 quarters that make up a year, all the 12 months that make up a year. And you get a very clear picture, especially if you add the projects that you were working on or the summaries for the pros and the cons, and you get a very detailed picture of the entire year at a glance. And let's dig into the charts a little bit. So yeah, these are quite similar from what we had from quarters and months, but now we have all the 176 days that I've had so far. Let's wait for this one to load. Yeah, so these are the same metrics, same structure, same trend analysis, except there is no daily data because we're looking at the year. So these are all the weeks I've had in a year across all these domains for trend analysis. You get your entire year worth of data in a single screen, especially if you use a larger monitor. Let's close this one down. If we go back to our cycles, so you can actually see we looked into the cycles from days to years I also have 3 more cycles in the system, realistically 2 cycles and 1 lifetime kind of page, because you only have 1 lifetime. But chapters are time periods of length from 3 to 5 years, and seasons are chunks of time from 10 to 15 years. These are much more about your identity, values, and vision. So the mastery score and all the metrics, they don't aggregate up to those time frames. But what you do get in those, let's go into our year. It's actually broken down here by chapter of life. So let's look into the chapter that this year belongs to. This is what I'm trying to work on for this chapter of my life. It actually started in this year, so it's a very recent one. So let's collapse these. It's got a very similar structure, but since it's more oriented for higher level strategy, it's got slightly different clarity and planning, but you also get a very similar reflection and review. So you can imagine that when you have a whole chapter of your life, like a season of 3 to 5 years, and you toggle the fundamentals review, and in this case it's got only this year, so you can't see that, but you can see a whole period of your life that's 3 to 5 years in a single screen, where you can, for example, see all the, if it's a period of, let's say, 3 years, that would be like 12 quarters, and you can see it on a single screen. That's very powerful. Or when you have a whole season of your life, imagine a period of 10 to 15 years visualized as a collection of all those years. So you can see 10 to 15 years in a single screen. Man, that's really powerful. I've been doing Notion very deeply for 5 years, so I don't have that view yet, but I'm definitely excited to see how that looks. In one glance, you would have thousands of data points. To me, that's incredible. By the way, if you want to integrate this system into your life, but actually don't want to spend 5 years building it, you can click the link in the description to get my help with that. So let's get back to our year, actually. This is where I would call this part done. This is how it looks when it's done all the way, when you can see your entire year just in a single screen with all your health metrics visualized, with all your performance on all the key habits that you've decided you want to track and execute. You have your mastery score, you've got your subjective scoring for energy, performance, and recovery, all your sleep data, your steps, and so on. Like all the key metrics all in one place, all in one screen, visualized very nicely, and being able to review it easily at a glance. Now that we have a bigger picture, you understand what it is that we're shooting for. The questions now are, first of all, what it is exactly that you need to track. 2, how do you aggregate technically everything that you track? And 3, how to make that review process effortless, so you actually do it consistently instead of doing it on motivation and then totally disregarding it. And this takes us to part number 2 of this video, knowing exactly what to track. So for this, let's close this here and close the cycles, taking us back to the daily cycle. And let's start by understanding exactly which habits do we need to track. So let's scroll down here. You can see these are my habits when I'm helping people implement this system and integrate it into their lives. These habits are going to be slightly different. But what you need to understand is that every habit that you track is a commitment of your time and attention. So choose wisely. Few recommendations I have here is 1, focus on the fundamentals that support your well-being. We're talking life admin, like the actual technicalities of having transportation, roof over your head, food in the fridge, etc. You have your recovery, which is sleep and a few other habits. Clarity, which is about the kind of things that this system helps with, planning, review, goal setting, resetting, reconnecting with your higher level aspirations, etc. You have your nutrition, which, of course you can have your own view on diet, but make sure you convert it to some fundamental habits. Movement, love, and so forth. These are the fundamentals. The second very important tip is pick the kind of habits that you can imagine lasting you a lifetime, or more or less a lifetime. That means, first of all, don't pick ones that are hyper specific. So you can see for my movement habits, I have movement AM and movement PM. Now, that doesn't say you should specifically do strength training twice a week. That's going to be too restrictive, and this is not going to apply across my entire life. If I just stick to 2 movement sessions, and they can be anything, they can be stretching, yoga, going for a walk, going to, a climbing gym, whatever that might be. So avoid them being hyper specific. Same goes for nutrition. Let's say if you design your habits around being, I don't know, like keto, and then a couple of months later you're like, oh, this keto thing is really not my jam, and you switch things up, but you already, let's say you added a habit of eating under 50 grams of carbs, like that's going to be super specific. And these check boxes that you add on a daily cycle, like you want them to be more or less consistent throughout your lifetime. So let's say a checkbox like food control, like this is very abstract, but it's very abstract for a reason, because my understanding of what food control is, that's going to change, but the checkbox is still going to be valid. So maybe now I'm on a very strict diet, so to me food control means, just chicken and rice. And then when you're more relaxed in your eating habits, that can change. And same goes for clarity routines. What are specifically things that are very well studied, very well proven, and you can know that you can sustain? Like, we know that you want to do some deep work if this is the type of day that you're having. Like, to me, it's an execution day, so I'm going to be focused on my deep work. You want to reflect at the end of the day. You want to plan tomorrow today, do some reconnecting. Like, these are very fundamental habits that you can add to your life and be very sure that they're going to be consistent throughout a huge period of time. And for life admins, checkbox like tidy. You want to tidy your house like every once in a while. Like, even if you have a maid, you still want to have that routine, making sure your desk is not a mess. But exactly what that means to you, that's going to change, and that's fine. That checkbox is still going to be valid. So that's tip number 1, avoid being hyper specific with these checkbox habits. Tip number 2 is avoid the hype. So maybe you were watching TikToks of morning routines of people and you see all kinds of things. Now, if you start adding that to your system, you're going to have a bunch of checkboxes that maybe you're excited for like a month, but then they're just going to, go away. So these are all your grounding and your cold plunges and whatever. You can experiment with those. That's completely fine, but try to settle on the very core habits for any of these domains that are truly what makes your life better, and you've noticed the difference and you can sustain, which is actually tip number 3, which is prioritizing consistency. If you see that some of these are very, let's say, non-restrictive, like for example my movement checkboxes, I can go for a walk and I would check the checkbox, but sometimes I do a very hard workout, and this is very non-restrictive for a very good reason, because it promotes consistency. Consistency is much more important than intensity. Make sure you track fewer metrics, because the fewer metrics you track, the more powerful each one becomes. As for your health metrics, I already mentioned these. It's really just sleep, weight, and maybe some objective measure of your recovery like HRV. And you can also track steps, which I track at the end of the day. For some key subjective metrics that you need to be tracking, we've had our energy level, but there are 2 more things that I wanted to say about that. And this is related to our performance and recovery. A couple of things to mention here. First of all, performance is relative to the goal of your day. Let's say today is my day that is very much focused on execution. So obviously I'm going to be judging my performance accordingly because I have a focus for this day, which is to record this video. But if my focus was to rest and recover, I would judge my performance according to that. This is point number 1. Point number 2 is the importance of these counterbalancing metrics, or what's called tension pair metrics. It's a concept I picked up from the book called High Output Management. It's by Andy Grove. It's a very cool concept where if you want to measure a performance of some area, it usually makes sense to have two metrics that kind of pull in different directions. The examples that he gives in the books, like for sales, you want to track both the close rate, but on the other hand, you would track something like a refund rate or a customer satisfaction score, because you're going to notice that maybe some sales guys are closing high, but that's because they're promising the moon to the client, and then the refund rate is going through the roof. Or let's say if you do manufacturing, that would be units produced per hour and the rate of defects or something like that. In this case, if you have a typical execution day, your performance would be your work, and your recovery would be how you feel at the end of the day. Do you feel like completely destroyed? Do you feel drained? So if, for example, a couple of days in a row you feel really drained, but that your performance is very high, what that means is that most likely your performance is going to crash in upcoming days. So whenever I have high performance, but then I notice that a couple of days in a row my recovery is lacking, I'm going to have a recovery day. I'm going to really pull back. So this helps a lot. And for subjective text-based metrics, I would really recommend just sticking to pros, cons, and lessons. Here, the tip is to not pick the metrics that are going to be specific to some individual cycle. So in this case, the pros, cons, and lessons can be generalized to months, years, or even like decades of your life. You're always going to have pros, cons, and lessons. And these are going to be also aggregated. I didn't show it in the first part because we were really focusing on the visualization part. But you're going to have these. I write them as a list. So this would be like item 1. This is how item 2. This is how I structure it, right? And then when I look at my week, I look at every single day and all the pros and all the cons for the day, and then I can easily summarize them. Just to show you quickly how this aggregation works, let's just open this week, scroll to projects, wins, and lessons review. So if we go here, these are all the days that I'm having. This is the today, so there is no summary yet because I haven't written it. This is the day I had yesterday. And I would have all these for the entire week. And then in my weekly review, I also have pros, cons, and lessons. And you would also take the pros and cons from the days and just filter out for the weekly significance. And then you can also have a summary. So once you've done all your pros, cons, and lessons, you just write out a summary, which is 7 to 12 bullet points that really describe and capture the essence of the week. And this is exactly the same structure that I have for months, quarters, and years. And you can see it's really easily generalizable. That's it for the metrics that you need to track. These are your habits, your health metrics, your subjective and objective metrics, and make sure you're filtering ruthlessly only to ones that matter, because every metric that you track should earn its place by driving a better decision. If it doesn't change your behavior, just drop that metric. Let's now move to part number 3 of this video, which will describe exactly how to aggregate this data consistently into higher and higher level timeframes. Let's again go into our week, and now we're going to be actually digging into the properties of the week to see how it works. If I show all the properties that I have in a week, we're going to scroll and find that this week, let's see, where is it? Yeah, so these are the days. So it's 2 so far, but it's going to have all the 7 days, and it's the same for every other cycle. Every cycle includes all of the child cycles. Well-designed system makes every day count twice, once now and once in the bigger picture. So every single cycle is an accumulation of the cycles underneath. There are 3 core lessons I want to show in this section. One is to automate aggregation, but not too much. 2 is to unify and standardize all the aggregation structures. And 3 is to keep lower level data out of higher level timeframes. So let's start with point number 1, which is to automate aggregation, but don't go too far. Let's scroll down to the review section. And point number 1 is obviously you want to automate the aggregation of all the number-based metrics. What are the number-based metrics? You can consider sleep a number-based metric, or your HRV, or your weight. So if we scroll and let's actually look into, let's say, weight, right? So this is a very simple formula. And if we dig inside, it has the entries, which are all the days that are filtered by those that actually have a weight property set. And then we divide the sum by the length, which is the basic average formula. This is the simplest case, which is very nice if we can do it this way. The sleep is similar, but it's slightly different. For example, sleep score is exactly the same formula, but if we are looking into something slightly more difficult, it would be like sleep start. So you notice that on a daily time frame, this is the way we enter our sleep start, which is just a string, just is text that's hour, column, minute. So we need to do a little bit of a massaging of that data to get that into a number-based form. So here is our sleep start is converted to a decimal. So this is the formula for this one. And then, of course, once we convert that to a decimal, we can do averages. So there is a little complication, but overall, it's still a number-based metric, so it's very easy to do aggregations on that. Then we also want to automate and aggregate anything that can be converted to a number. So what I mean by that is if we go to our days, we have our energy, our performance and recovery, and those are not numbers, but they can be easily converted to a number. So if you notice, actually every single option here is a drop down of 4 options. So you can have high energy, okay, low, or 0. So you can easily convert that to a number from 0 to 3. And same exact pattern goes for performance and recovery. This is why they're standardized to have 4 options each, because then you can easily convert each to a number from 0 to 3. And this is what you can see here. So we are on a weekly cycle, and you can see that performance is a formula that first it goes through every single day and converts the label to a number 0, 1, 2, 3. And then, of course, it does the same average formula that you saw on, let's say, HRV or sleep or weight, but first it has to convert it to a number. So if you have a drop down and you want to aggregate that data into higher time frames, make sure you first convert it to a number. That's the trick. And then just to dig into formulas a little more, this is our subjective scoring formula, the one we saw in this display here. So if you want to have this percentage in parentheses, so first of all, we have our mapping to emojis, which is this here. But then if we want to display percentages, but we have our numbers from 0 to 3, this is how you convert it to percentages. So basically, this is a very simple formula. Once you have a number from 0 to whatever, you can easily convert it to a number from 0 to 100. You get all the emojis for individual days, but then you also get a summary for the entire week. And now if we look into our habits, you already know that they are all converted to numbers. So going back to our days, we get the scores for individual domains, and those can be aggregated into weeks. So let's take nutrition. Okay, here we go. So this is our fundamentals. So if we dig into that, let's just take recovery. So you can see that it looks through all the days, and every day has recovery points and recovery target. We look at the target, we look at the points, and we convert it to a percentage. In this case, it's a ratio. And then we can map that to a specific emoji. And this is the conversion that you can do for individual domains like recovery or nutrition or fitness, but you can also convert the overall mastery score. So since we have the overall mastery score and the overall mastery target, we're also converting that to a ratio, and then we can convert it to emojis for this color coding that we saw in the summaries. You do that for all the rows, and then if we scroll down, this is how it's put together. So then we have a header, we define all the rows, and then we just add them all up. So that's it. And final point to mention here is don't go too far with the automated summarization. So you might be tempted to also automate the summarization of your text-based properties. So if we look into our pros, cons, and lessons, you can think that you can automate that with AI, and you can even do that inside of Notion. You can say, I get all my pros for 7 days of the week. Let me just grab them all, throw them into AI, and tell them to extract, let's say, 7 to 12 bullet points to summarize for the week. And I do the same process for months, quarters, and years. I would highly advise you not to do it, because you shouldn't be automating just because you can. You want to automate the math and not the meaning. So your pros, cons, and lessons plus summary prop, AI can do that, but it's not going to be as good as you. But also, I guess a more important point is that this summarization that's manual is actually the point of the review. You want to manually go through all the pros and cons and read them for the day and then create your summary. This is part of the point. You want to remind yourself of all the things that you've done that you're happy with, some of the cons that maybe need work. So you just go through it again manually and extract the stuff that you still feel that holds significance at a higher level time frame. So don't automate that with AI. Point number 2, moving on, is unify and standardize all the aggregation structures. Systems that scale, they start with repeatable structure. You already notice that our cycles have a very similar structure in the template level and in the display level. So if we look into the higher level structure here, yeah, it's the same for months and years and quarters and so on. So it's also true for these properties here, but it's also true when we look under the hood in the specific naming and formulas and all these. And this is exactly what I want to mention here. First, you want to have the same naming. So let's say sleep, start, whatever. Sleep start, even something like this, sleep start decimal, right? If I look into my months and I look at all the properties and I search for it, it's got the exact same name. Recovery, performance, energy, total sleep, everything is going to be exactly the same. If I look into my quarters, it's going to be exactly the same story. Let's search for sleep start decimal. Yeah, you notice even the order is the same. That helps a lot. Second of all, you want to use the same aggregation methods for all the cycles. So let's say if you use averages when you aggregate the, let's say, performance property on a monthly level, you want to use exactly the same method for quarters and for years, etc. If you use some specific calculation of percentages for your mastery score for months, you want to use the same method for years. And if you use these 2 tips, that's going to allow you to do point number 3, which is using the exact same formulas everywhere. So if we look into basic ones, let's say HRV, this is the average formula, and it's going to be exactly the same. Look at this formula on a weekly. This is actually monthly, but if let's look at the weeks, so let's search for HRV. This formula is going to be exactly the same. And if we look on quarters, it's going to be also exactly the same. And that basically allows you to just copy paste formulas from cycle to cycle, which is very easy for maintenance, it's very easy for consistency, etc. And if we look into even more complicated formulas, so let's actually do something pretty crazy. So this is the entire formula for creating the summary for the sleep and recovery data. So this is our quarter. So we take this formula that references a bunch of properties. So there is a lot of naming that's specific, seemingly specific to this cycle, right? There's a lot of calculations. There is a lot of logic. So we can just copy this formula And then let's go into our weeks, which is a very different cycle. Let's look for sleep, right? So this here, and then we just completely delete this formula and enter this one. Click save, and nothing changes. It's exactly the same formula, which is super cool. So let's move to point number 3, and this is keeping lower level data out of higher level timeframes. What you need to understand is that every level up in terms of cycles, timeframes, is your opportunity to compress complexity. You can hide the noise and reveal the signal. The real art of systems thinking is knowing what to leave out, so your focus stays sharp. So for habits, for example, on a weekly level, you can see that we get the breakdown by domain of life. If we look into months, there is no breakdown by domain of life because that's too much detail. Now you can always dig down and find that breakdown per individual week, but on a very high level, that's not what you see. You see only the summary that's condensing all that insight. If we look at our number-based metrics, then we see averages. So here, the sleep time from to, these are all averages, and sleep score is an average, etc. Sometimes an average can be misleading. So for example, with sleep time, with sleep start time, if you have, let's say you're shooting for being asleep by 11, but then one day you go to bed at 10 and then another day you go to bed at 12, the average is 11, but is that really how you want to live, or do you want to every day go to bed around 11? So in this case, I've added another metric called SSD, which is my shorthand for sleep start deviation, and it calculates exactly that. If you had one day where you went to bed at 11 and another day when you went to bed at, let's say, 1 o'clock, your average is going to be 12 o'clock, but your SSD would be 1 hour because there was a deviation of an hour each day from your ideal bedtime. So if you can see that averages can be misleading when aggregating data that's number based, then you can add some extra metric to add some more clarity to that. And this is also very important when it comes to text-based summaries. If we look into our, let's say, week, you notice that we have summarize and celebrate. At the end of the week, you actually summarize all the points, all the pros, cons, and lessons into one single summary. And you're going to have the exact same format for all the cycles. This is going to be dropping a lot of detail, but that's by design. You want to have a very easy way to, at a glance, see the essence of a cycle. So the secret to insight isn't more detail, it's actually ruthless summarization at every single level of the timeframes. And when you summarize, you're going to be really happy that you did when you're going to be reviewing that cycle, because clarity compounds. And it compounds only when you give each time frame just the information that it needs, no more and no less. And this leads us very well to the next part, making the review process effortless and non-negotiable. One thing that you will notice if we look at the higher level structure of every single cycle, this is our week. So if we look, every cycle has a section for review and reflection. So review of fundamentals, review of projects, wins and lessons, summarize and celebrate. If we look into a month, it's got exactly the same checkboxes. If you look into a quarter, let's toggle this one, exactly the same structure. And let's look into the year finally, also same structure. And same goes for the template. Every single template for every cycle has the review and reflection section. So years, quarters, months, weeks. That's our point number 1. Have clear routines set aside for reviewing your data. A system that isn't reviewed is a system that's already broken. Like, you can't improve what you don't review. You have to make it a ritual. Point number 2 is to plan and schedule these review routines in advance. Every single cycle has planning, and inside of that, it has routines planning. So if you look into my planning of routines, for example, then you're going to see, let's say, quarters. Every single cycle has this button that generates the routines that I want to plan. So whatever cycle that you see, months, you're going to notice this button. And what this button does is when I generate it, let's just see. These are the weekly routines that I want to be planning. And everywhere you see that there is a weekly review and reflection. So every time I plan my cycle, this is one of the most important routines that I plan. And I throw it into my calendar right away so I know I never miss it. So make sure you set aside not only routines as existing like checkboxes, but also that you plan them and schedule them into your calendar in advance. Now, you can auto schedule them, meaning instead of having a macro button that generates these items that you can then throw into your calendar, you can automatically create them on a schedule. I prefer actually doing it manually because it takes me like 30 to 60 seconds, but it gives me slightly more control so I can throw them into sometimes slightly different times and places on my calendar. But this is how you do it. Let's go to my next week. You already see that I have my weekly reflection and review planned for that June 30th. That's how it works. The next point is to make sure you have enough mental bandwidth when you are actually doing your weekly, monthly, etc. review. For if you follow the advice in this video, your weekly and monthly reviews are going to be kind of a walk in the park. They're going to be quite easy for you. Like you take a week, let's go to the week that was here before, like this one. So reviewing this week would be really, really easy. It takes me probably 30 minutes overall to do the entire review process for the week. Like this is very easy. But the reason I say you should have enough mental bandwidth is because some of the higher level reviews, they're a little more involved. If you're doing a quarterly or yearly review, like whatever systems that you have, like however great your summarization processes are, or however great your visualization of your performance is, it's still going to be quite an involved process. So make sure that you have high energy. Like for me, I do weekly reviews Monday morning. So set aside time when you know you're going to be thinking clearly, and just make it non-negotiable. So for example, I do not start my week's work on Monday unless I've done my cycle review and planning. Those routines come first, work comes after that. If it's better for you to do it on Sunday, fine, but still make it a rule. Treat it like you would treat work, like you have a meeting with a client scheduled. Your routines are that important, or probably even more important than that. It's the highest ROI time you will ever spend, so treat it as such. Another tip is to review at a glance first. So if we're looking at a weekly cycle, this is the template, and the summary on the left is something that I would look at first. And then I would decide if I want to look into the details of, let's say, my fundamentals. So this is the fundamentals section. I would look here first, and I can immediately see that Monday to Wednesday, like there is no need to review because nothing was happening really that needs my attention. I can see that Thursday and Friday, like I had a little bit of a drop in performance when it comes to recovery and nutrition. So I can dig in and see what happened. Okay, on Thursday, I can immediately see that I underslept. Like I had 3 hours of sleep in a night, and then I also took a nap, but that still didn't amount to enough sleep. So I can dig into that. But first of all, look at the overview and understand that the goal isn't to review everything. It's to see exactly what matters right when it matters. You start with the high level summary, whether it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, and you kind of use pattern detection to guide your attention. So you use your color coding and all the formulas and visualizations that you've built to let the data highlight abnormalities. You look at the high level picture, look at what needs your attention, and then you zoom into that, which actually leads us very well to the next point, which is deep dive only when needed. So don't dig by default, dig with purpose. You only drill down into the specifics if you spot something off and you want to understand why it was off. And you do invest more time on higher level timeframes. So when I say dive deep only when needed, that also refers to higher level timeframes. If you're doing a yearly review and you actually set aside, like, I would even set aside several days of doing it. You can spend a couple of days doing your yearly review. That's okay on a yearly level. So instead of doing a surface level scan, you do dig into subcycles and maybe even sub-subcycles, but only dig deep when it's needed. And finally, just enjoy your review process. That's a very unique opportunity for you to celebrate your wins. You will inevitably forget even the stuff that you did like 5 days ago, not to mention something you accomplished 3 months ago. So be grateful, enjoy it, notice it, and celebrate it, highlight it, summarize it, and take your time to go through the wins like that. I don't know, for me, I've grown to really love this review process, whatever cycle it is, whatever time frame it is, because I'm a kind of person that always feels behind, always feels like, and maybe you can relate, that you always feel like you're not accomplishing enough, you're not moving fast enough. So with this review process, it really helps you look at the entire month, and of course you completely forgot that you did some of the things, and you're like, oh, I actually did accomplish quite a lot. And it just helps you with the gratitude and helps you be more consistent with the whole review process because you enjoy it more. These are all the tips that I had. Remember that the fastest way to waste your data is to skip your review process. So you have to make sure you build a system that never lets that happen. You want to make this process very streamlined. You want to make it efficient. You want to make it enjoyable. And you want to build in the visualizations that help you along the way and the system that helps you along the way. Keep in mind that this entire review process is only one stage of a 6-stage clarity cycle that you really need to optimize your life. So to learn more about that, watch this video next.